Imagine a horned helmet, a fearsome warrior leaping from a longship, axe in hand, ready to plunder. This image, burned into our minds by centuries of stories and Hollywood films, is what we think of when we hear the word Viking. But what if I told you that this iconic image is almost entirely wrong? What if the horned helmet is a complete fabrication? What if these supposed barbarians were also meticulous craftsmen, shrewd traders, and even surprisingly clean? For the next 10 minutes, we're going on a journey to strip away the fiction and meet the real people of the Viking Age. Let's start with that helmet. It's the most famous piece of Viking gear, yet there is zero archaeological or historical evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets into battle. Not a single one has been found. The image actually comes from a 19th century costume design for a Wagner opera. It was meant to look dramatic on stage, and the idea just stuck. In reality, a Viking helmet was a simple, practical bowl shape, maybe with a nose guard. Horns would be a terrible idea in a fight, something for your enemy to grab onto. It's a powerful lesson in how a simple myth can overshadow 1,000 years of reality. So if they weren't wearing horned helmets, who were they? The word Viking itself is misunderstood. It wasn't a nationality, it was a job description. To go Viking meant to go on a raid or a trading expedition. A farmer in Scandinavia might go Viking for a summer to gain wealth and then return to his fields. Most people in the Viking Age were not full-time warriors. They were farmers, fishers, merchants, and artisans. They lived in longhouses with their extended families and livestock, their lives governed by the harsh seasons of the north. Now let's address the idea of them as mindless, savage brutes. While their raids were undeniably brutal, they weren't random acts of chaos. They were often strategic, targeting wealthy and poorly defended monasteries. But this violence was just one part of their world. Back home, they had a complex legal system. They held assemblies called things, where free men gathered to settle disputes, pass laws, and make political decisions. It was an early form of democracy, a far cry from the anarchy we might imagine. And what about their hygiene? Popular culture often paints them as grimy and unkempt. The archaeological record tells a very different story. Excavations of Viking sites have uncovered an abundance of personal grooming tools: tweezers, razors, combs made of bone and antler, and even ear spoons. Arabic traveler Ibn Fadlan, who met a group of Vikings on the Volga River, was disgusted by their morning ritual of sharing a water basin, but his account also confirms they washed every single day. An English chronicler from the 13th century even complained that the Vikings were far too popular with English women because they bathed weekly, combed their hair, and wore clean clothes. They were apparently quite dapper for their time. Perhaps the biggest myth is that the Vikings were an isolated people, sealed off in their frozen lands. The truth is, they were some of the greatest explorers and traders of their age. The intricate patterns on their jewelry and weapons show influences from Celtic, Slavic, and even Middle Eastern art. They established vast trade networks that stretched from North America, which they reached 500 years before Columbus, all the way to Constantinople and Baghdad. They didn't just take, they traded. They sought out silver, silks, spices, and glass, offering furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves in return. Their longships, true masterpieces of naval engineering, were the key. Shallow enough to navigate rivers far inland, yet strong enough to cross the open ocean, these vessels connected worlds. We also tend to forget about the women of the Viking Age. They weren't just waiting at home. Norse society, while patriarchal, granted women more rights than many of their European contemporaries. They could inherit property, run the farm while the men were away, and even initiate a divorce. The image of the shield maiden, a female warrior, is debated by historians. While sagas tell epic tales of women fighting, archaeological proof is scarce. However, a famous 10th century warrior grave, once assumed to be male, was recently confirmed through DNA analysis to be that of a woman. She was buried with a sword, axe, spears, and 2 horses. This doesn't mean female warriors were common, but it proves they existed. It shatters the simple narrative and shows us a society more complex than we ever imagined. So, why do these myths persist? Because they make for a great story. The savage barbarian with horned horns is a simple, exciting character. The reality is more nuanced and I think far more fascinating. The Vikings were not a single-minded horde of raiders. They were a diverse people, explorers, poets, politicians, farmers, and pioneers. They were innovators whose influence shaped the language we speak, the cities we live in, and the very map of the world. By peeling back the layers of myth, we don't diminish them. We find a people who are more relatable, more complex, and more human. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the Viking Age. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind the myths, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which historical myth you'd like us to tackle next. See you in the next video.